Listeners, welcome back to Tales of Abundance. Why settle for less? As always, I'm here with John Oberg. How are we doing today, John?
I'm good, man.
Good. Well, last week we started something new. We talked a little bit about current events and tying them into abundance and the five F's and what's going on in the world. It's early, but we've had really good feedback from that. And so we're going to continue that today. And in fact, the entire episode today is just going to be about some of the things that are going on. And it may not be immediately obvious how they tie into the five F's and where they're going, but we'll try and put that bow on it by the time we're done. And I'm excited about this, John. I think this is one of those things that I think hopefully if people listen to this, their IQ goes up a point or two, including mine and yours. So I could use
Yeah,
the
look, there's some topics here that for me, it's like I want to be curious about, what the future holds, especially, and so I'm interested to get into it for sure.
Okay. Well, let's jump into the first topic. I'm going to give a whole bunch of points, and it may not be obvious how they all tie together because we'll go through these one by one, but I think these all tie together. It's going to be Elon Musk. And in particular, he made a comment recently that 80% of Tesla's revenue is going to come from humanoid robots or robotics, which is in its own, and he has predicted 10 to 30 million or billion, 10 to 30 billion humanoid robots on the planet, I think by 2030 or 2035, I forget the time frame, but Brett Adcock at Figure has a similar prediction, and there's hundreds of companies. There's a lot of people think this will be the biggest thing in the world, the biggest industry in the world. Well, that's a production issue. That's what they're all trying to solve right now is how do you produce that? But what we're going to talk about today or tie into is it's an energy issue. And where is all that electricity going to come from? We're already using more electricity, but all of a sudden robots, and everybody has probably heard, or if you haven't, AI is a really big thing, and it uses a ton of electricity. So, electricity production and the chips, and then Elon's pay package. He just has a proposed pay package of $1 trillion if they hit certain benchmarks at Tesla. So let's jump in there, John. You and I, we've talked about robotics. We've even debated this. I think we have different opinions on this a little bit. I think there's a really good chance in the next couple of years that we'll have robots in the home. I think you're a little less bullish than I am, and maybe a lot less
I don't know
bullish
why
from
you
our
keep
last
saying stuff like
conversation.
I already know someone who's got one in their home, so I don't know why you keep saying I think you just naturally think I'm less
Well,
enthusiastic or agreeable, but I know someone who's actually testing
okay,
one of Amazon's robots in their home. I think it's cool. Like it's a
okay.
dog that like carries things back and forth in their home for them. I don't know if I have strong opinions
Six
about it,
months
but it's
ago you
cool.
felt 6 months ago you felt very different at the round table. You and one of our mutual friends were
Oh, I think I felt differently about how fast it would happen for jobs like landscaping and for the trades. That's different but I do think, there's going to be there's a huge amount of humanoid robotic kind of opportunities. And I had lots of questions about definitions. Like if you take a human off of a manufacturing line in an automotive plant 30 years ago and you put a robot in place of that, that's not a humanoid robot, but it's a robot that replaces them. Does that count as one of these 30 billion or not? Like that's an interesting question that I have. So.
I think both what Brett Adcock and Elon Musk are talking about are not those robots. I'm pretty
Gotcha.
sure because I've heard both of them in interviews have talked about specifically humanoid robots,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. There's so many different use cases, right? Like, I think every time you turn around, you can find humanoid robots that could do something a human could do. I'm betting there's a lot of things you can imagine a humanoid robot doing things that humans don't do also.
Would you put one in your home?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I don't know what I would use it for right now. But I mean, I'm not opposed to humanoid robots in any way, shape, or form. I'm
I mean,
assuming you're not
would
either.
you like be willing to be one of the first people to test it?
I think within some parameters, right? I work from home and I have some like HIPAA restrictions in the house. So as long as I wasn't violating like HIPAA or anything like that, I'd have no problem with that. But yeah, I mean, I look, we're pretty early adopters of lots of things. We have a lot of home automation already, and so I just don't like. Generally speaking, if I can do things that make so that I can have more time that is discretionary, I'm a fan of that.
Me too. I would gladly be an early adopter. But I've talked to a lot of people that wouldn't, right? Like there's a lot of people that just aren't comfortable with that. But again, you know, I drive everywhere by pushing a button and just sitting in my car. I'm perfectly comfortable with my life being in the hands of really a robot, or, it's a robot AI car that's driving me places. So for me, having one in my home is a lot lower risk than having it drive me around the roads.
Yeah, I think that goes back to like Everett Rogers' work, diffusion of, he talks about diffusion of innovation. He was the big guy at Stanford and New Mexico that talked about like there's the innovators in the world, then there's the early adopters, and there's a big gap, right? And then you have like the early majority, late majority, and laggards. And so I think you and I are probably in that innovator, early adopter part of the world. And so, and I don't think I have no value judgment about where somebody is. And I think that different products, people fall into different places in that kind of chart, but I think it's cool.
Yeah, and the real question becomes production, right? Like Elon Musk has proven to be an expert at being able to produce and get production up. Brett Adcock seems like he's pretty darn good at it too. I believe, wasn't he with a one of the flying car companies? I think he made some money, exited from a flying car company, and then put a bunch of his own money into creating Figure. Like, and it just seems to be a passion project to him. I think he self-funded for two, three, 400 million at the beginning, if I'm not mistaken.
Was it Archer Aviation? I think
Yes.
he was associated with. So
Yep. I think
yeah,
he was the
and
founder and CEO of that and exited. Yes.
yeah, yeah. See how fast I can pull that up online. I had no idea what that was 2 minutes ago.
Okay.
So
There you go. Great. You are our researcher, co-host and researcher all in one, multiple hats.
what? Well, I think it's worth saying though that like I just finished the book that Isaacson did on Elon Musk, and one of the stories in the book was Elon was automating a lot of things in one of his factories, and he automated what turned out to be a bad process. His words, not mine, and he ended up cutting a hole in the factory wall, throwing all the robots out, and having humans go back to doing it because it was better. And the lesson for him was to fix the process first before automating it with robots, as it were. And my guess, and I'm guessing here, is that he would say that robots will be able to figure out some of that in the future when you have different types of robots. And so I'm pretty hopeful that we're going to see some things that make our lives better. But I think you got to remember too that like our our world is a much more complicated world than it was 60, 70 years ago. The number of bills that we pay per month compared to what our grandparents paid per month, like the number of bills they had to take care of was, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was like less than 10 or something like that. And we're taking care of like 30 or 40 or whatever it is. And I don't know if those are the exact right numbers, but directionally, it's just a much more complicated life we have. And so, and sometimes we automate our way away from things. Like now we have software packages that go in and figure out all the subscriptions you forgot about because you've subscribed to so many things. And just, it's a different world.
Yeah, and there's challenges, right? By the way, I believe all of this is leading us to abundance, right? Like these robots and all of these things is going to eventually lead to a lower cost of living. I think right now cost of living certainly going up and getting worse, but I think that eventually it's going to lead to a lower cost of living, more abundance. But the challenge is I gotta believe one of the first things, whether it's Figure or Tesla is working on, is robots that can make other robots and
You know,
replacing jobs. And that's a challenge all in its own. That may not be a huge topic for today. That might be a whole nother topic, but I think that's
yeah,
coming.
let's dig into that for half a second about perspective. You said you hope it's going to lower the cost of living. Let me just offer a different perspective and see if we can just beat on that for a minute, because I would say that it's widely talked about that like most people on the planet today, or at least a lot of people on the planet today, live better than most emperors over the history of time. Sanitary living conditions for not the whole world, but for a lot of the first world, and with like indoor plumbing, and the middle class lives better than most of the richest people in all of history.
Right.
Like, hasn't it already lowered the cost of living in the sense that we've raised the standard of living so much that, yeah, it's true that we continue to raise the standard of living, but if you hold the standard of living equal, right, to like you know 300 years ago, 200 years ago, we've already lowered the cost so much that we've democratized most things, which is and will continue to do so. And so I don't say that as meaning that like we should stop now, because I don't think we should stop now, but I do mean that in the sense that I have great gratitude for how far society has come. And I think that, you know, I think if we take a step back and can be grateful for that, it leads us to a different starting place in the conversation going forward.
Well, yes, and I think that if we can lower it even more, that much better, right? And I don't want to turn this into an economics thing, but my mind automatically goes to before the Federal Reserve was created. If you go from 1813 to 1913, the cost of living in America got cut in half, and wages grew significantly. That was really the first time the world had seen a middle class. Is and yes, there were the robber barons or so-called who got super rich, but a whole other group of people went from poverty to middle class, and the cost of whether it was housing, food, whatever, got cut in half because of technology. Well, technology has grown far more since 1913 to today, and robots and all this stuff is going to make it grow even faster. If the money wasn't broken, we could have both. We could have the standard of living rise, and again, I don't want to turn this into a complete economics thing, but my brain, that takes me to the Fed
Yeah,
and
I get it.
Bitcoin
You
and
you can't
everything.
you can't get away from that. I get it. I get.
Yeah.
But but to your point though, look at the things like in terms of cost of living. Like if there are people in the middle class who consider flying on vacation a part of their budget, like in 1910, that wasn't a thing, right? And so we've got to look at it in the sense that we've increased the standard of living, pretty significantly in a good way. And so I don't know. For me, it's just a jumping off place in terms of gratitude to kind of say, okay, like I'm really grateful for where we're headed, and I do think we want to be mindful about what the future holds, and we've got to be careful about like hidden interests. Um, but I think that's been the case for most
Yeah,
of history, probably.
it has. So I think the choke point and what listeners need to be mindful of is it's not just production, and certainly it's computer chips, which we talked a little bit about last week and will again in the future. But the big thing is electricity. And electricity usage is going up. Well, if we have 10 to 30 billion humanoid robots, how much electricity are they going to use, right? And we're just have more computers, more chips, more everything. AI data centers are using electricity at an alarming rate, and so I have
Is
a
it alarming to people? You know more about this than I do, but when you say alarming, you mean like more like there's more energy requirements that can outstrip the system so that people's air conditioners might get turned off on hot days and lead to really tragic events?
yeah, I would expect if we don't increase energy production, AI companies are going to bid more, and they're using more and more. And I'll tell you something that's really telling. If you go back a few years ago, if you remember, Silicon Valley was all green energy, and they were, the carbon credits and all this stuff. And they were against nuclear, they were against everything, right? Well, if you notice, you don't hear any of that from Silicon Valley anymore. None. In fact, Microsoft just bought a nuclear power plant, or created, I think they're reopening 3 Mile Island, if I'm not mistaken. Elon Musk bought a power plant in like Germany that he's disassembling, bringing back, and putting back together because of all the regulation. Amazon is talking about creating a nuclear power plant. Like, they've gone the opposite way. Like, because of AI and because of the need for energy, these companies are needing way, way, way more electricity than they've ever known. And you don't even hear them talking about fossil fuels the way they did, right? Like,
Yeah.
we still need more solar, more wind, nuclear by all accounts. And I've talked to some people, nuclear physicists and other things, is the safest energy there is. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is more people die falling off windmills every year than have died in all of the nuclear accidents in history, not to mention the billions of birds that they kill. So I'm not saying we should get rid of wind, and I put solar on my house. I mean,
Yeah.
in the last
Well, there's one.
year.
Yeah. Well, you just missed one too, which is like battery, right? You and I have talked about batteries, and battery technology seems and again, not my area of expertise, but I do hear rumblings that we're really close to some breakthroughs in battery technology that could really help us with things like solar and wind, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. That's my problem. My house produces more electricity than I use every day, but
Yeah,
I don't have enough battery power. I've only got one power wall and I really need two, maybe three so that it lasts me through the night. Or if I do have a blackout or a brownout, that it would stay fully charged. Right. And
yeah,
so, um, well, here, just let me share my screen real quick. And uh, this this chart, I looked up multiple charts before this call. They all show slightly different numbers, but if you notice worldwide in 2025 how much energy is going to be needed, this predicts by 2035 it's going to be, over double, like 2.5 times. If we
yeah.
look at China, the US, again, we're talking about double the energy production. And if we take that to by countries, look at this. I think this is really telling. If we look at the US here, for those of you not seeing it, the US energy went up from 1985 to about 2000. Since 2000, it's up and down, but it's a pretty flat line with it actually going slightly down despite the fact that our consumption is up. So I know especially some places like California, and I think the Northeast had a big brownout a few years ago. This is why we're using more electricity, but we're not producing more. Look at the EU. Same thing. The EU is actually going down. Russia is up a little. Japan's been down. But look at India here. India has gone up pretty dramatically, and even more dramatically, so much I have to scroll up if you're not viewing. Look at China, was almost at the bottom with India in 1985 and was still, it took them until 2005 to be half the energy production of the US. And now that line is almost straight up. They're 2.5 times the US just 20 years later.
Yeah. But I want to give a quick shout out to my friend Ken Wiegand too, who's was the first one to talk to me about geothermal energy and some of the work we're doing to figure out geothermal, which could be another interesting. I don't know how it would rival nuclear energy necessarily, but um, the reality is that there's a little bit of an arms race here for energy.
Yeah, there is. What are the implications if we lose the AI war?
Yeah, I don't.
I
That
don't
one
know.
frightens me a little bit because I don't understand it. Yeah,
There's that is a real, but India and China are really putting money into all forms. China is opening coal plants, they're opening solar, they're opening wind, they're opening nuclear. By the way, you and I haven't talked about this, but are you familiar with thorium? I
no,
hope
I another word.
I hope I'm saying it right. Um, I should have pulled up articles on this, but the gist of it is the US created this and patented it like 30 plus years ago, being able to take thorium to make nuclear energy. It's far more, it works better than uranium, and it's really, there's tons of it, right? Like we recently found a thorium deposit in the West. I believe it ranges from like California to Nevada that could power the US for tens of thousands of years. And it's
So
safer
it
than you.
looks like it's naturally occurring. It looks like.
Yes. And far more efficient, safer than uranium. And the US has just not done anything with it. In fact, the patent expired. Well, last year, China, while you're checking here, China opened two or three, you probably fact check me to be exact, but they literally took our patent and opened. They, by the way, have a deposit far bigger. I want to say theirs is good for 400,000 or 600,000 years. Like they just have insane amounts of this, and
Got it.
they're producing thorium, and we're not.
And so, yeah, so for clarification, thorium naturally occurring, so it can't be patented. But the patents that Randy's talking about were about processing it for manufacturing and purification that were taken. So
Yeah,
that's
and
concerning.
they're using it, and they're producing these generators, and this is part of the reason they're frankly kicking our ass when it comes to energy production. Which I think we're talking about all these projections of where AI is going, but the limiting factor is going to be electricity. along, we started with robots, but I think this is a real crisis in America. And I think energy prices, they've been going up. They're going to continue going up unless we get our act together and start making energy. And
But
I don't want
yeah,
to
it's
debate.
interesting.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's an interesting question for people to think through. Like, like I don't think about energy every day in the way that you're talking about. But it's like if I lived in a house, I'd want to. I live in an apartment, but if I lived in a house, I'd want to understand like what does this mean for solar energy. And back in I think the late 40s, maybe 50s, 60s, that people had victory gardens to kind of make their own food. And so I wonder if we're going to have some type of like energy renaissance where people think about solar panels and other means of energy in that same way. I think it's an interesting set of questions. I always think about like, okay, what does this mean for policy? And I'm less educated there. What does this mean for my community? And I'd have to be a little more thoughtful about that. And then more importantly, what does it mean for me? And I think, what do I do to help support my energy needs? I happen to live on a hospital grid, so that I'm considered on a, what do they call those, a critical grid or something. So there's less risk for me being browned out because I live on a critical grid. But gosh, for people that aren't on critical grids that do rely on electricity for particularly for, health reasons, this could be certainly meaningful. Nursing homes that aren't on a critical grid or
Well,
yeah,
just stop and think about what would you do if you didn't have energy for even half the day or whatever? Like, how would your life change?
yeah,
You know?
yeah.
I mean, it's a big thing. I mean, this is the number one indicator worldwide of extreme poverty is energy. Like, if you look at places that do not have access to energy, people are just poor. Africa has 600 million people still without energy, and those villages, there is no wealth.
Well, and we talk about wealth. I mean, you're talking about financial wealth, and we've talked on the show about I've met people who have far less money that are very, very happy. And so you can have lots of types of abundance, but what you're talking about is like helping people get out of conditions that are, lower than we would hope for any human, to kind of bring them up in the world, which is, I think, for me at least, I feel like there's a responsibility I have to improve the world in the ways that I've got a gift. And this is something we can think about for people, right? Like how do we get energy to people? Um,
I mean, it's just, look,
do you
kids
think
want to
do you
get
think there's like
educated. If
yeah.
clean water, I mean, it impacts so much stuff that we just take for granted.
I was just going to ask you about that. Like, I live in a world where people often do like mission trips and they donate money to things like clean water wells in Africa. Like, do we think that maybe this clean energy, we start doing more projects for clean energy? I'm guessing there's tons of clean energy projects through volunteer organizations already, but I wonder if that becomes more of the mainstream conversation the way clean water has over the next couple of years. Well, we should track that and talk about it with listeners as we pay closer attention.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely you know, it's a way we can spread abundance in the world, is getting people access to energy, access to clean water, and all of that is just all that's going to take more electricity, right? And so it'll be very interesting, as this grows. I tend to believe more in, I guess, the Star Trek future than I do most of the sci-fi movies you see. They seem to me, most of them are pretty dystopian, and I just think that I have a little more faith in humanity than that, and I think that we're growing. And while I think we're in a rough transition time now, we've talked about the fourth turning and some other stuff. I I think we're coming to the good part of that, right? And after the hard times comes the good times, and I think it's abundance. But there is a road where the AI companies or whatever are taking all of that energy, and people are getting less than they get now, right?
I wonder if there's going to be like there was a push when I think like with internal combustion engines, there's a thinking that we could have been a lot more effective with those over time, had more research gone into that. And I wonder for the people who are creating chips today, if there's a big push in having more energy efficient, high capacity computing power. I have to imagine there would be. We should, I just talked to a guy a couple weeks ago who used to live in that world. Maybe we'll bring him on and see what the current thinking is around energy utilization and how we're thinking about not just raw power, but also you know, compute for less. That's one of the big promises of like quantum, right?
One of the problems with what?
Promises is one of the promises of quantum computing.
Yeah, I mean, an AI, super intelligence. They talk about super intelligence. Maybe it solves these problems, right? Like maybe when that happens, we can really capture the sun, right? I mean, it's something like the sun produces thousands of times more energy, or the sun that hits the earth is thousands of times more than we need, but we're still capturing a very small percentage of it. And who knows what else super intelligence, what other problems it can solve. But computer chips. I'm I'm looking for how many computer chips there are in the world, or like some kind of a chart. But um, it's anyway.
I think the scientific term is a whole lot.
Yeah, I mean the number is growing, right? Everything has chips
Oh
now.
yeah, yeah. I was watching a TV show. It was a medical drama, and they were showing a prosthetic leg that had a computer chip in it. I had no idea that prosthetics would have computer. Like, I'm sure it makes tons of sense. I was just like, but
I mean,
to your point,
the NFL's putting them in footballs this year. They don't have I don't know if you watched
some
the
measure,
NFL this
yeah,
year, but if you
yeah, yeah.
watch, there's no more chain gang. They're doing electronic measurements because the ball has chips in it for the first time. I mean, they're so cheap and small, but again, everything is.
I wonder if they put two, one at each tip and one in the middle to see which part actually made it furthest forward so they can place it correctly.
I'm pretty sure there's multiple chips in there, yeah, based on how the ball's sitting
Well,
in the field.
so now this has got me thinking about like as an apartment dweller, what are the things that, I live in a condo in a building, like are there ways to get like solar panels on the windows that like I know that exists. I don't know how effective they are, but now and then can you do that at a building where you're one of many? And so I've got a couple action items I'm going to take from this. And then you brought up the NFL. One of the other topics we had today was the NFL. Do we want to pivot into that?
We can, yeah, let's do that.
So I was reading this weekend that Tom Brady bought in as a minority owner to the Las Vegas Raiders. I was in Los Angeles when they were the Los Angeles Raiders,
Right?
and I've been a lifelong Raiders fan. Woe is me! Like you think it's tough being a Vikings fan, try being a Raiders fan. And so he's a
You have
minority
Super
owner.
Bowls. I would argue it's been a much better ride.
Not in my lifetime. We have it. I guess we had one. Um,
I got two
th-
or three in my
so
lifetime. Yeah.
what about you know, there's everyone's talking about this conflict of interest. Like Tom Brady's an analyst, so he works as a broadcaster, and he's an owner. And for people that don't understand the life of a broadcaster, like give us a quick background, like because you don't just come on and call the game. Like working as a broadcaster is a full-time gig where you have a lot of preparation that goes into that broadcast on Sunday or Monday. So maybe you just start by telling us like what it is that Tom Brady does as an owner, and for those of you who don't know, Randy is a massive football fan, has played football and flag football at a really high level competitive, like with former NFL players. So Randy's got a good eye into this part of the world. So maybe just give us a quick primer on like what does it mean to be an owner of a team and what does it mean to be a broadcaster?
Well, some owners are very hands off, right? And they hire people to run the business, and they have a general manager and those types of people, coaches that run the business, and they're hands off. There's other owners like Jerry Jones that have their fingers in everything. And look, I know fans get frustrated by that, but if I spend when he bought it hundreds of millions, or these days many $1 billion to own a team, I'd probably want to tinker too, or be in the middle and have my say. But Tom Brady's a
And by the
minority
way,
owner.
along those lines, I want to say Mark Cuban in the NBA just realized the NBA was moving in the hospitality direction, and I don't experience Mark Cuban as being humble in the media very often, but he had a humble position to take. Was like, hey, it's going in a place I don't have expertise, so I went out and found somebody who did, and decided to sell a portion of the team. And I, again, I just think it's interesting that he's recognizing the change in what sports mean to society. And so now you've got people, as you said, they're investing billions of dollars to buy. And Brady just did this too. He just invested for a minority position. I think it was, how much was it? It was
I
a lot of
don't know the
money.
I don't know the amount. I
I'll find out.
I
You
don't
keep
get
you
too
keep telling
much
us about it. I'll
into
find out.
the business of sports. I watch sports for I don't want my sports to get into business and politics and everything else. I just really want to be entertained. But you know, he's a minority owner, and the problem is he's not. He's also the lead announcer for Fox. So every week he's going to a game. Well, they actually changed the rules. A normal announcer, when they go to the game, they come in, I don't know how many days early, but days early, and they will go spend a day at practice. And the night before, they are at the team hotels with both teams and they're in meetings and they're getting information, like proprietary information from coaches, like, hey, when we see this look, we're going to call this play, and things they need to do or know to be better prepared for the game. And Tom Brady does not have that access. Like, because he is an owner, he has less access than any other announcer, and because they don't want him sharing that with the Raiders. Well, he still is at the game. So I, by the way, think this controversy is a lot of ado about nothing because he does not have special access like other announcers. But last week the Raiders played, I think it was a Monday night game, and he was shown sitting in the coach's booth and on a headset and supposedly communicating with, hey, here's what I see, like acting as a coach. So he's an owner. He broadcasted a game on Sunday, flew to Vegas on Monday, or I think the game was in Vegas, and sat in the owner's booth and gave feedback. Well, there's no rule any owner can't do that. Jim Irsay's daughter runs the Colts. She has a headset that is listening to the play calls and doing everything. And she's not the only owner that has, or he's not the only owner that has an impact. It's just people, they're not worried about Jim Irsay's daughter being able to, impact the game. And I think there's a big misunderstanding by most people. I understand being concerned, like, hey, let's not give the Raiders
Yeah.
and Tom Brady a special advantage. But I don't think he does, because him announcing a game, how is that different than anybody else watching the game or watching film or the all 22 of a game? All right.
The article, I only read one article about this conflict thing, and it talked about the fact that a lot of times in the pre-production meetings or production meetings, they go through and they talk about like some of the coaches and players can be pretty candid about their team's weaknesses, where they are in terms of the injury report, and a concern they might have like on third and long about their playbook or whatever. And they might be, they might share more of that information, where that could actually be information that never comes off on the air, but is actually important, and could be utilized to exploit if it got back into another locker room.
Correct. And Tom Brady doesn't have access to that. That's my point, right?
Yeah.
He is not allowed to go to those meetings. So if there's anything, he's actually working with one arm tied behind his back as a broadcaster. He has a disadvantage to every other broadcaster in the league. Now, maybe by association and being there, and he's with his partner, who knows? He has, I mean, I understand the concern. I just, if what I understand, he doesn't have special access that everybody else has.
Got it. Well, this is a great example. Like, we talk about conflicts of interest in my work, when I'm sit on boards and things like that. And conflicts of it, like, if there's a conflict of interest, it can be navigated around, right? Where people have to be excused from certain, conversations, votes. And it sounds like that's happening today. And, I wonder, I'd be really interested if we do like a survey with all the owners in the NFL to see how they felt about things, or all the GMs or head coaches, if they're really concerned about it. I would say that based on my Raiders results, I can't imagine too many people are real concerned about it right now. Which I wish it was a bigger concern. And by the way, it looks like Brady paid, he and a partner paid in about $245 million to get a 10% stake. It looks like Brady paid about 120 million for 5%.
Imagine when he gets more. I'm sure that he's going to keep buying more and more. I would be surprised if he doesn't keep increasing his stake at some point.
Yeah,
But I also know he's been working with the team. Like, he's been communicating with the coaches and helping quarterbacks. And there's no rule that keeps other owners from doing that. I think the concern is that just other owners don't have his knowledge. I think Peyton Manning owns part of the Broncos. I think it's a much smaller portion, but I'm sure Peyton Manning helps the Broncos. John Elway, by the way, was the general manager of the Broncos for years and part owner. Probably is still part owner, and he definitely was working with the team and picking players. The conflict is potentially the announcer's booth.
But doesn't Peyton's an announcer on ESPN for Monday Night Football too?
Oh, great point. In fact, my favorite announcing crew is him and Eli, the Manning cast. Yes. Um, that is true. I never thought about that. I don't know why. And maybe he's not an owner of the Broncos, but I think
He says, yeah.
I think
My
he
my
is.
friend Gemini says he does not own part of the Denver Broncos
Oh,
today.
okay. Well, I'm wrong about that then.
Yeah.
Or Gemini is, but
Um,
more likely it's me.
well, who knows? But in 2024, he clarified he's not actively pursuing an ownership or executive role with an NFL team today.
Well,
So
John, let's talk more about the conflict of interest. Like
yeah,
you've got things in your life, and you're on various boards, you're in various companies,
yeah.
like how do you navigate that? If somebody's listening, I mean, what are the things they should be thinking about and be aware of?
I think the most important thing is to make sure that all of like when you have a conflict of interest to disclose it and make sure that there's transparency and that you have good policies in place around how the organization is going to navigate conflicts of interest. And so I mean there can be anything from, organizations have a right to refuse to do business with someone who's conflicted to, hey, we're going to navigate it and here's the way we're going to navigate it. I've seen it, not for me personally, but where a vendor disclosed all of their kind of gross margin percentages based on a conflict of interest with the nonprofit board. So I think the most important thing is being transparent with people where there are conflicts of interest, and then letting people decide how they want to navigate those conflicts of interest.
Well, and I know this is something you're really aware of. I mean, I can tell from personal experience. We've had things. I don't think I'll get into a specific example, but we've had cases where you have a part ownership of my company, and we're working with other companies that you have an interest in, and you just simply have said, "Hey, just so you know, I have an interest in this. I have an interest here." You tell both parties, and I mean, there could be a time where you excuse yourself, and then there's also times where you're just like, "Hey, you guys need to know that I have a conflict of interest here, right? I got skin in both games."
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
And I think it gives everyone the chance to say, like, if they don't want me to be part of that conversation, like that's fair, right? Like that's acceptable. So, yeah, and you can, I think I try not to set up situations like that, but in the case you're talking about, it was like there was two people I was working with. It was mutually beneficial to both sides, and so I didn't want to not put people together. That doesn't make sense. So yeah,
So it just, like I think the biggest thing for me take is just be aware of it, right?
yeah.
I
Well,
do
what
some
what would
consulting mostly with like some private equity things where they ask me questions and interview me. And every time I do it, I have to fill out all this compliance stuff, which, they're very, very sensitive to, but not most businesses aren't going to go to that extent. And, I have to take tests and there's a whole bunch of crap, but usually it's just, I think being aware of it and, the regular business world doesn't go that deep.
when what was your experience on the receiving side of me saying, "Hey, Randy, I'm conflicted here."
Look, I appreciate it, right? It makes me aware. And, I have to think, okay, what are John's incentives, right? I know you well enough to know. So if I didn't know you as well, I would think, which one's more financially beneficial for John? Which one gets him where he wants to go? What are his incentives? What's this? What's that? And how does that play out? Now, I know you so well that that's not what you're thinking. Okay. But somebody that, if I didn't,
That's right.
so it's that,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And now imagine what would happen if I hadn't disclosed those things and you found out later. How would you imagine that would have felt?
Yeah. That would suck.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it feels pretty gross.
Yeah.
So
All right.
yeah, yeah.
Do we want to move to birth rates?
Man, we talked about this a little bit last time, didn't we?
I don't know if we have, but let's start. Why don't you?
Didn't maybe we did. I had to go back and listen, but I think we talked about like the fact, at least in a meeting we were in, we talked about how college universities may see lower applications for the first time next year as a result of lowered birth rates in the U.S. So there's an industry, higher ed, that has to start preparing for this. And we've got an economy that's been based on you know GDP, right? So gross domestic product is like, what's the total output? Well, if you have less people producing, right? um not to say GDP is going to go down, definitely, because you could produce more per capita, But it does become harder because it's not just about the production, it's also about the consumption, right? And so if you've got a global birth rate that's declining, I think the global birth rate we looked at before this show has gone below the replacement rate. So replacement rate is
Yeah.
2.4.
Here, I've got
And
another thing I can show. Um,
yeah,
Here's a chart that I pulled up. Uh,
and at the end of the chart, what you're going to see is that the replacement rate right now is 2.2, or I'm sorry, the birth rate is 2.2. The fertility, I think it's called the fertility rate, and the replacement rate's 2.4, right? So
yes,
we're
I mean,
actually, that shows population decline globally.
yeah, I mean, if you look at this, this chart starts in 1960 at 4.7. It got to a high in 1963 of 5.3, right? I'm assuming is that the baby boomer generation, right? And if you look at it, I mean, this thing has, there's a little, but it's not that far from a straight line from five. What did I just say? 5.3 in 1963 to 2.2 in 2023. So it's safe to say that in 2025, it's at this rate, it's probably 2.1 or 2.0. And
And
if the
when did you say
replacement
that high point was? What year was that high point? 63?
1963 was
That's like
5.3.
that's the end of the baby boom. So baby boomers, according to my friend Gemini, ended most generally accepted 1964 was the last year.
Okay. So, yeah. So, we were in that 5 range during the baby boomers to 2.2 or
Yeah,
2.1. Probably, again, this thing stops a couple of years ago and going down. It's not getting better, it's getting worse.
yeah.
I mean, this is a problem. I mean, you talked about the economic problem of GDP, but how that plays out. I mean, GDP is kind of an irrelevant number. What's not is tax revenue, and what's not is $37 trillion that we have in debt. If we have 37 trillion in debt and GDP drops, tax revenue drops too. And when tax, it just becomes harder to pay back that debt, right? So,
So let's just play that out. So if I have $37 trillion in debt in my what's revenue right now for the government roughly? Just round figures.
revenue is about 5 trillion.
Yeah. So if it goes down to 4.5 trillion, that's $500 million less to pay the debt with, and it just gets harder and harder over time.
Well, and
So
at current rates, we're adding about $1 trillion of debt every 100 days, or 3 trillion. The budget is 2 trillion, but actual spending is about 3 trillion more. So now instead of 3 trillion, it becomes 3.5 trillion, and now we have to pay interest on
yeah,
it, right?
yeah,
And again,
yeah.
I'm hoping robotics, more electricity, more abundance increases that and can solve our problems. But
Increases tax revenue.
yeah, just costs. It would, what if the government used AI to cut costs significantly, right? And
No, it
now
wouldn't
maybe
cut,
we
but it
could
would,
actually
but it would.
balance the budget.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's like I can't remember the numbers from earlier this year, but it was like the discretionary spend was like 2/7 of the budget or something pretty small. So even if you got rid of the entire discretionary part of the budget, you're still barely able to have a balanced budget. And so and because there's so many entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, like that's the challenge we bump into. And so one of the things that would happen with a lowering birth rate is those people matriculate through to Medicare, you would have less entitlements, but you're talking about 40 years from now, right?
Yeah, I mean, uh, again, I have a lot of hopes for AI, robotics, 3D printing, you name it, right? All of the things happening with medical technology. I know there's really smart people that think we're going to wipe out all disease in 20 or 50 years. I have no idea if they're right, but if we do, that saves money in healthcare, and there's a lot of ways this can go really well. But a declining population is not good financially for that ratio, right? That debt to GDP. Um, you know, Showing here, I'm going to go back to share the screen again on the same screen. If we look at, it's interesting by country. If I just scroll down from where we were, and this is from the World Bank, but look at Afghanistan. Well, there's been a war, similar to the baby boomers, had a lot to do with World War II. I mean, that 4.8, I think they're trying to get back, but look at Albania, 1.3. Andorra, I don't even know where Andorra is, 1.1. Angola, again, I think war. Antigua, Argentina, a lot of these places. Argentina is interesting. They've had really bad financial and hyperinflation. I think a lot of that's people don't want to bring kids into that world.
Well, or they feel like maybe they feel like they couldn't afford to.
Yeah. Wow, what was that one? British Virgin Islands one, although that's probably a little bit older population. Uh, you know, China one. I mean, that's a real demographic problem for China, because the other thing that happens is you're going to have more people on Social
Yeah.
Security, more people on, in
Yeah.
America, it's Medicare. I'm sure they have different things, but, if you're at one, you're way below the replacement rate. I know they had the one child policy for a long time, and I don't know if they still do or not, but look at these countries. There's
Just
so
the
many of
number
them in
of
the low
countries
one.
below two, that it's really amazing. Like, I wonder how many, like, let's keep scrolling for a second. Like, how many countries in the first world are above 2.4? And the answer looks pretty small.
Yeah, I mean, Ethiopia is at four. I mean, I was looking at this before the call. I noticed a lot of the countries that have higher is where there's a lot of killing and death, and like it's not a safe place to live. Which I think there's something in human beings. Look at Japan, 1.2. They've got one of the, that they're,
Italy is the same, 1.2 in Italy.
yeah, wow. I mean, again, you're going to have more old people. There's fewer. Oh my God, look at Korea, zero point 0.7. Like, there's going to be no kids to work to produce things for old people. I mean, that's the real
Yeah.
danger here, right? I mean, back to our first topic today of robots. I mean, is this a place where robots can pick up the slack? Is there, again, Liberia, it's places. I think Liberia's had revolutions, and who was just 0.6? Oh, Macau, China, 0.6. Wow. Anyway, it's, yeah.
Mali, look at Mali, 5.6. Something's going right in Mali.
Wow. Well, or I don't know anything about Mali. I mean,
I,
for all I know, I've
I
never
don't
worked
either.
on Mozambique, 4.8, 6.1 in Niger. I'm almost positive they're, have their own wars and problems. Um, Poland,
Puerto Rico,
1.2.
0.9.
What's that?
Puerto Rico, look at Puerto Rico, 0.9.
Wow. Yeah, Poland, 1.2. San Marino, wherever that is, 1.1. Singapore, a lot of Asia, really low, 1.0. Anyway, people
Yeah.
probably don't want to go through this whole list, or they can on their own. Spain, 1.1, really low. I'm just going to go down to the United States. Okay. Yeah. So, United States, 1.6. But this is I mean, what do people do about this, John? So, back to I'm going to turn your question back on you. What, what does this mean for the world if somebody's listening?
I think a lot of people would say have more kids. I think there are probably some people that think that a lowered global population is better for the globe. I don't, for me, um, I think I try to look at this from a number of perspectives. Like I always kind of put it through the five F's, right? So the financial, I think, is the easiest one to measure because we can see what's going to happen to the economy. And it means we have to, at the very least, rethink our expectations about what that's going to mean for the economy and how we're going to navigate the upcoming turns. There are going to be some turns in the economy as a result of this. And so I think if we don't navigate those turns deliberately, it's going to be more painful, just like driving in the car, right? If you don't take the turn in the road, it's a lot more bumpy road than if you stay on the road. So I think that's the easy financial piece of it. I think from a family piece of it, um, it saddens me a little bit that there's a lot of people not having kids, and so yeah, I don't know. I I think there's lots of different circumstances and situations, so I can see there being a lot of perspectives on that. Um, it did seem to me, and again, just looking at the more expensive countries to live in, I wonder if people are worried about the expense of bringing a child into the world as a real thing. I have to wonder what that looks like. I think I recall reading somewhere that there were some places that had financial incentives for having children. I don't recall where they were, but um, I think that's an interesting data point for sure. Um, yeah.
I mean, I mean, humanity's survival, right? I mean, now, on the other hand, again, I'm more bullish than you are on this, I think, or just time frame wise at least. But the if life expectancy increases, people start living to be 150, 200 years old or more, maybe that solves the problem. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I think it may solve one part of it at the least. It would solve the consumption problem, right? I'm just thinking about this, like because that group would be consuming for longer, but you still may have the productivity problem, which to your point, maybe some of the robots offset some of that potentially. And so that's a possible outcome. I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but that's a possible outcome.
It's an interesting world we live in. It's really it, it is pretty exciting to be alive today. Like things are moving. Well, I do feel that we're in the fourth turning, which is a whole nother thing, and we're kind of going through the hard times make strong men period, and then strong men make good times make weak men make hard times. I really feel like we're in that weak men have made hard times, and hard times are making strong men. I don't know how long this lasts or this transition, but I really am optimistic that we're moving toward a world of abundance and more for everybody. But we have some work to do. But
Well,
it's
and
exciting to be here during it.
the one thing I say to my family and people I work with too, and you've heard me say this to you, is like, it's like, what does it mean for me? Because I think, when people look at the world around them, if they're ever kind of dejected about it, generally there's some things you can do in your own world to make your world a little bit better. And I get that it might not be true for everybody, but I would say that most people that I talk to, there are some things they can do to improve their own circumstances, despite there being a difficult environment, right? And I'm not in any way disputing the difficulty of the environment. I'm just saying that I recognize there's things I can control, things I can't control. It's a different level of difficulty for everybody. And but what are the things that we can control to make our life a little bit better? Like I think that's an important set of questions, at least for the people that I interact with day to day.
All right. That's our topics. I mean, anything else you want to put a bow on, or anything you want to make a fine point on, John?
I think for me, this just really reinforces a topic you and I get back to off the air a lot, which is curiosity. I think that I feel like for me, curiosity serves me super well. I think your curiosity has served me well in the sense that it stretches me to think about things differently. And I'd say a lot of times we see things the same way. A lot of times we don't see things the same way. What I really appreciate is new perspectives and letting my curiosity, really kind of take a deeper look at things when you bring a new perspective. So I appreciate that. And my hope is that I have better formed opinions as a result of the conversation, and maybe that our listeners can, maybe they find new perspectives on abundance or new places to find more abundance in their lives. I think there's a lot of opportunity. For me, it starts with gratitude.
Love it. Let's end on that. I can't top that. Listeners, thank you as always. Download, subscribe. Tell us how you like the new format. You can follow us on social media, wherever you use social media, and give us feedback on what you think. But as always, I hope life is wonderful and finding abundance in your own way and contributing to abundance in the world. So thanks, John. It's been great.
Yep. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Listen and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Click follow for more content like this, or go to talesofabundance.com to join our community and get free tools.